Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. Individuals who have taken the time to sit back and reflect on their experiences and ask themselves the question, what's helped them to find their sense of belonging? I say this every week. I do say this every week. We've got a very special guest, but I mean, this week we got a super extra special guest with us because it's none other than Simone Webb. Um, she's an inspiration for so many people. Simone is currently a research associate at the Hanifa Lab of Biosciences at Newcastle University. But she's also, I should let her tell you this, but I just want to blow her trumpet for her. She is an incoming Royal Society career development scientist. Um, I'm going to let her explain it, but it's a major and massive achievement. So I'm going to kick off by asking that first question, which I ask my guests every week. So, Simone, can you tell me what it was or what it is that gave you your sense of identity and your sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Hey everyone. Thank you, Wayne, for the introduction. I grew up in London. I grew up in South London with my family. There were five of us siblings all together. We grew up in a Caribbean household in Britain. So my sense of belonging or my sense of identity from being small was really around that background that my parents brought into the household and that community that I was a part of in my environment, which was very mixed. There were a lot of dual heritage people there. There were a lot of people that had traveled to the UK really recently and migrated. So my sense of identity and belonging was reflected back onto me. I saw people that looked like myself, and I felt, assured in my position of, okay, I'm a, young black girl growing up in London, and everyone around me is, well, there's a lot of Caribbean people around me, and that's my ancestry. That's where I come from. So that reaffirmed it for me from the earlier days.
So you felt more Caribbean than British, would you say?
I'm not really sure.
Or
'Cause you can never be fully one way, isn't it? Because
yeah,
we would go to Jamaica on like summer holidays, right? You know, you got your 6 week holidays.
yeah.
And every time I'm going over there, people are shouting after me, English, just 'cause the way I'm walking. So, you can't always fully be the one way, but also you recognize that when you're at school and maybe um a bit more of the British culture's coming in, or people that are more white British are coming in and you're interacting with them, you're realizing, okay, I don't quite have that cultural understanding or that same cultural background as these people that have grown up really nearby me. They've been brought into this environment. Well, they've been growing up in a completely different environment to me, but they're just a few miles away. So, you can never really be fully one or the other
Yeah.
because that's just by virtue of having parents that have migrated to a new country. But I didn't feel sort of out of place in who I was as I was growing up because I was in that environment, that bit of a bubble, I guess.
Hmm. So when you were at school, and when you moved out of the household, so as you said, the household was very Caribbean in feel, but when you went to school, what was that like for you? I know you said that you grew up in London, so I suspect it was quite multicultural as well.
Yeah, so it was a really mixed school. Yeah, it was a lot of African Caribbean background students in my class from primary school to secondary school. And then when I got to sort of post GCSE stage and I was trying to figure out where to go, um, it was then that I had to kind of make the transition into an environment that wasn't quite what I was used to growing up and maybe had much fewer black students around and
Mhm,
maybe was more reflective of the population more widely across the nation.
mhm,
Because as I say, it's a little bit of a bubble either way. But it was so my bubble burst then when I went into sixth form.
mhm,
And
mhm,
when I went into those environments, so I had to sort of leave my secondary school because they weren't able to offer the sort of all of the science A levels that I needed to do because I
mhm,
really wanted to be a medic at the time. And my school was really struggling, so they got taken over. They failed a whole ton of inspections. So, they weren't. the teachers just turned around to me frankly and said, we can't do chemistry A level. You're gonna have to just go somewhere else. So I did, and that is where the bubble burst. So, like I say, that is where I was around. I was seeing myself reflected less, and that's where I was starting to have those sort of growing pains, trying to figure out how do I retain this sense of identity when I don't see it constantly reinforced and reflected back to me.
You see, what you just said. There was many brilliant things there, but there was one thing which really tickled me, which was the fact that you said that the school that you were in
Mm.
just wasn't a good school.
No, no. I mean, the teachers
Hmm.
were on point and they really cared about us and they went
Hmm.
above and beyond and most of the hours they worked were hours they weren't paid for. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
They knew my older brother, my older sister. They knew my whole family. We would
Yeah.
all go through there. They were those kind of teachers, and they were really batting for us. But the resources at that school were not the resources that will help you necessarily thrive. The teachers were invaluable, but the resources that the school got was subpar. And that's the case in a lot of schools. So the teachers were doing their best to fill the gaps and find other opportunities for us outside of that environment. So, for example, they knew that I wanted to go on and do medicine and things. So they heard about an astronomy GCSE I could do if I went somewhere on a Saturday. So in year 9, 10, 11, I went to some other place outside of my school to do that. So they were always on the lookout for these kind of enrichment activities to kind of get us on level pegging with
Hmm.
other people that would have had would have been better resourced basically. But yeah, the school itself was not like necessarily outstanding. The teachers did really have to put a lot of effort in to fill those gaps for us.
That's really that in itself to me is a bit of a dichotomy
Mm,
because what you've said there is that the teachers who are, I would say, who are instrumental in developing young
mm,
minds,
yeah.
right? They went above and beyond, but yet the school was still deemed to be
Yeah,
failing.
they went above and beyond, but there were just a lot of issues that the school were facing
Yeah.
in terms of like poverty, dealing with children that were going through poverty, youth crime, youth violence. We weren't the most funded school. We didn't have a lot of, yeah, there wasn't a lot happening.
Mhm.
So teachers made stuff up for us. Um,
So do you think that helped in your drive to come out of that kind of environment? Because you said that you could, when you moved to your next sixth form, that was where you found that clash, or that
There
was.
was that clash. I didn't enjoy that move, to be honest. I found that move dis difficult. It was it was a completely new world. It was a reality check of of the bubble that I had been raised in. It was a reality check of, you're in Lambeth and it is 30% Afro-Caribbean, and the population in the country is not 30%
Yeah.
African-Caribbean. So it was a bit of the reality check, but I didn't necessarily I didn't feel the pull to I didn't feel like the pull to leave. It was more a push.
Yeah.
I didn't look around and go, you know what, this isn't working out for me. There's not enough for me. I'm gonna leave now. This isn't great. I was I I had I mean, teenage years are teenage years, but I had a decent time at school. I didn't like hate it. I was all right. I would have stayed if I could have stayed. I would have stayed. It
So
wasn't it wasn't a pull and now seeing other opportunities, other avenues, and thinking, for my future, I need to do X, Y, Z and do this. It was a push of the teacher saying, we can't do this for you. You're gonna have to find it elsewhere. So it was definitely the push into the unknown environment. And it was a really difficult transition because I went in there. I don't think I had like, I don't know, the foresight or the warning from people that it would be quite different.
mhm.
I just kind of thought, I'm going to school, it's really nearby. Um, they
It's really,
they do the courses I want, it's gonna be fine. Like it's just
yeah.
a school, it's just another school.
It's
But it was different.
No, it's really interesting that you said that because it sounds to me that despite what people would regard as the poverty of the school and the scenario that you found yourself in, you were comfortable in that environment.
But I think you can be comfortable in any environment if you're around it long enough, isn't it?
I'm not sure. There's certain things where you think, it,
Yeah, well, everyone will go through that differently. So, for example, my
mm,
brothers, as young boys, would have gone through that environment very differently to
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Yeah, everyone's going to go through it in a different way. But I And even with my younger sister, we were very close in age, and we're both two young black girls going through the exact same situation. But I was able to always catch like the science side of things. And she
Mhm.
was just like, this is not for me. I hate that the teachers are always asking me to do things the way we used to do them. So even for us, there was a
It was a
difference.
different experience.
Because she's much more of a creative person and she catches that much easier than me. And we were just different. So different people will go through the same environment in a very different way and get a different thing out of it.
Yeah.
Maybe my brothers would say, yeah, I had a pull and a push, and I
Mhm.
jumped ship,
Mhm.
because one of them I know would say that.
Mhm.
But for me, it wasn't the case. I feel like because of the teachers doing the additional things, I never felt lacking, so I kind of just kept it moving,
Mhm.
and it was all right.
So there was enough to inspire you,
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
keep
yeah.
you moving. So they provided that supportive environment for
Yeah, it
you
was
to
it
be
was
able
it
to
was
thrive.
it was that it reached that little the sufficient threshold, like
Mhm.
we had a teaching assistant. He should have really been a proper teacher, but he had a teaching assistant, and like every lunchtime he'd be there with his little models for this for the like skeletal structure of like carbons and things like that. He'd have his little Haribos and we'd be sitting there with sweets and just figuring things out. Like yeah, I didn't feel like I was just not academically stimulated or anything. I got what I wanted.
Mhm.
Environment, but my teachers had the foresight to say, do you know what? This is not gonna long term be enough for what you need. Like
Mhm.
the ones that highlighted it to me, I didn't realize.
Mhm. So you said the environment that the new environment, the second environment in sixth form, how
Yeah.
did that differ and how did you meet that challenge?
I think I just kind of like, when they say like you sink or swim, I think I just like sunk for a bit.
Okay.
Because because the teachers were asking me to do things I'd never heard of before, genuinely. Like they would
Mhm.
just say words and I was like, what are you on about? And
Mhm.
then I realized the gap. And then I realized, oh, that's why my teachers were encouraging me to do this because, you know, like an example, like, oh, we didn't do triple science, we did double science because that's just what we did at our school. And
Mhm.
suddenly I realized, oh, I'm at a massive disadvantage because I've not done the physics, chemistry, biology curriculum that everybody else had.
Mhm.
Uh, so when I went, it was kind of a sink for a year because I was basically
Mhm.
catching up on a lot of content that I'd not been taught. And again, the teachers tried to fill the gaps. So they put us through for a separate biology GCSE because they knew a set of us were really keen on biology
Mhm.
and they knew that we would want to have done the triple science if we could have. So they put us
Mhm.
through for those exams. Um, but yeah, the gaps start to show basically. So for me, the gap started to show in sixth form where it was like, okay, I was used to performing at the top of the pile there, but when I
Mhm.
come here, I'm way below average, and everyone else got it like that.
Mhm.
And I just don't. So I had to kind of sink for a bit and figure it out before then I could catch up.
So how did that make you feel when you were going through this process?
Oh, I think it was a very ego thing. It was just a big ego bruise, isn't it? It was just an ego bruise. You think you've got it all figured out and you shining star and then no, falling star, you're done. Like you need to start from scratch here. So it was an ego bruise, but it had to be done, I guess, because I had to see what I guess I was up against, or I had to see what was expected of me at some point or another. And I thought I was performing and I thought I was working, and I was, but I just didn't have that context
So what changed
during.
during that time? Because you said you sunk for much of the first year.
Yeah.
Um, what changed? Did anything change?
I don't know. I don't think anything did. I think time just passed. I
Mhm.
think I just needed time. I just genuinely needed time to catch up. So I see, for example, where people do like transition years for undergraduates and things like that. Like I get because of that experience, I get why those things would be really valuable. Because if you've come from an environment where you didn't
Mhm.
tick like 1 to 10 of the checklist, having that year to transition and basically sink and then float back up again is really helpful. So I
Mhm.
didn't quite have the time to catch up fully, um, and get the grades that I would have wanted to get at A level
Mhm.
because for me a B was a fail.
Okay.
And I got a B and I was like, what's this? What is this? Um
So you
anyway,
had high aspirations for yourself.
yeah, because I kind of thought F put in this effort that I've done historically, then it will be the same. But I didn't account for that dip. So
Hmm.
I had to do that dip and then catch up with what was expected and then just, yeah, figure it out.
So based off that then, because you also said earlier on that you had aspirations to do medicine, how
Yeah.
did that impact on you then? Because if this was something that you'd wanted to do.
Yeah, I was really, well, the thing is, I really wanted to do it because it was what people that like were quote unquote good at science or interested in science were recommended to do. I think that was the default suggestion that teachers in my environment would have said, like if you were more linguist, then yes, you must go for law or something. That's the big high achieving thing you should do. And then if you're into science, then do medicine. And I don't think there were a lot of examples of other career paths that you could go down in my secondary school anyway. So when the teachers were being really well intentioned and wanting the best for us, they would offer these two things up as the two options.
Hmm.
So for me, it was, yeah, do the medicine route. And I knew like I wanted to do science and have an impact. And so I thought that seems about right. I'll do it. But the A levels that I got wouldn't have gotten me in. So
Hmm.
I essentially had to drop chemistry because I wasn't getting the grades I would have needed. Switch tack and then reflect a bit and say, why do I want to do medicine in the first place?
Hmm.
It's because it was the only option offered to me to
Hmm.
do science. And I've never seen someone from my background do science as a job. I don't know what's out there. So I
Yeah.
was like, just take the risk, just do biology. Like biology is the one you want to do. You want to do the more human sciences.
Yeah.
So so just stick with that and have faith that it will pan out basically. So I kind of had to switch tack by the end of my A levels and go for what I thought was more realistic with the grades that I was getting, but also what was, when I looked at it with the evidence, what was actually closest to what I wanted, which was to just look at biology a bit more and have an impact. So I kind of vaguely knew I could have a career in science. I didn't know what it was, and I just thought I'll take the leap and see and figure it out.
So that's it's interesting because one of the things you just said there was about that you didn't see anybody in science, in
Yeah.
other sciences. So I was going to ask you that question about role models and also mentors. I get the feeling that your teachers were pushing you, but did you have anybody else who you could go and talk to and say, I don't know what to do. How can I get to where I want to go to?
Yeah. So I did see I did see people that were doing great. Like, for example, this teaching assistant, Mr. Okonkwo. Every time I go home, I randomly see him in the library, Mr. Okonkwo. He was inspiring for me and he made me feel like it could be a fun thing. But in terms of role models, I went to Saturday school at UCL and they were specifically looking or targeting schools that were in underserved communities and saying, come in to UCL on Saturday 10 till 2 or 3, and we'll do these enrichment activities for you for free. And so I went there for a few years with one of my friends. We were always late. We were always 5 minutes late. And but we were able to do these really cool things. We were able to do like archaeology, first aid, all of these words that we didn't quite know what they meant. It's at that transition stage where you start hearing you can do things like philosophy and I don't know, it's not the standard GCSE mix. So we were able to learn those things there. And what was nice was that on the UCL Saturday school, there were black undergrads attending. And so I was able to I remember meeting like a young black woman that was doing biology and she was just a unicorn to me. I was following her around. I was like, so what do you do? No, but what do you do every day? Like, what do you do in the morning? And then what do you do in the afternoon? And then, so do you have a job? What job do you have? Do you get paid? Like, I needed to hear that it was a secure thing and seeing her there really excited me. So in terms of going back to the question, in terms of the role models, I was able to get a bit of that through exposure to those outreach programs and in seeing people that were doing those roles that I didn't quite have a clear vision of because I didn't really have anybody in my immediate circle that were doing these roles. But they were there and they were guiding me and they were giving me the advice or answering all of my questions.
So that's what, so it what so it's interesting because you had to go external to your family, as it were, or
Yeah,
to the
yeah, yeah,
community
yeah, yeah.
in to find individuals who could help propel you on the direction where you were
Yeah,
hoping to be able to go.
Yeah, there wasn't it wasn't that I was able to turn to like a parent or a relative or a close family friend and say, "Oh, like I know you do law or medicine, tell me how it is." But
Hmm.
it was just that that close environment would be really supportive of saying, "You want to go Saturday school? Sure, of course. Tell
Hmm.
me what you learn, you know?" And they'll sign the form and I would be able to go and I'd be supported and encouraged to do it. But there wasn't that direct, they didn't have the answers directly for me.
Hmm.
Basically they had to bat indirectly for me, which they did.
Hmm.
That's why I was able to go to these opportunities and be supported to go on these other opportunities where I got the information externally.
So there was the encouragement to achieve,
Yeah,
even without them necessarily knowing what environment was going to look like for you when you got there.
yeah.
So um, you went to UCL then,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So what was your experiences like at UCL?
That's a loaded question.
No, whatever, you can answer it however you want to. Right.
It was a bit of a continuation of the bubble bursting from
Mhm.
sixth. So I was 2 years into the bubble bursting and I was getting more familiar with it and I was starting to float a bit, so I wasn't sinking so much. I'd
Mhm.
finally kind of caught up on the content. I wasn't feeling so angsty, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, but again, it was a really white environment, and I hadn't grown up in that, so it was very strange for me. It was an unfamiliar environment still, and that just kind of, I guess the sixth one prepared me for it in
Mhm.
a way. So that was, I'm really happy that I did that first because the
Mhm.
straight to uni thing would have been really shocking.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was a continuation of that. But again, I was able to sort of find community and meet people. Initially, I was sort of running into the African Caribbean society, trying to sort of meet people there. But then eventually, I was learning that my experience wasn't just one that was impacted by race, and it wasn't just by being around other Black people that would make me feel like I was among fellows. It was also a class thing.
Mhm.
So, although I was going to ACS, we're then going to events where people are wanting to like spend thousands on shots for everybody. And I'm like, where did you get this money from? Like, how deep does your bank balance go? So I couldn't understand. Like I kind of joined the ACSs for that level of understanding and belonging. And it wasn't there because it wasn't just a race thing, it was a race and class thing for me. So then I co-founded the Hip Hop Society at UCL at the time with some friends. And that's where I was able to actually get that community and that belonging because it just crossed us over. There were just too
Mhm.
many sections where I was able to really walk into that room and relax and go, do you know what? You might not look exactly like me. It might not be the race that connects us and makes us have the belonging, but we have maybe the mindset or maybe have the background or the socioeconomic background where we can really bond over here. So UCL was interesting for many reasons, which I can go on to.
Mhm.
But the positive aspects were that I was able to find community and so I can go on to it now. So
Mhm.
the outreach program at UCL really encouraged me. And without it, I don't think I would have been at UCL doing biology at all. I don't really know what would have happened, to be honest,
Mhm.
if I'd not had that initial support. So that outreach program was amazing. And I'm really grateful for that. Um, But I did get very disillusioned as I continued to go through the undergraduate. For example, there was a eugenics conference hosted on the UCL grounds while I was an undergraduate, and I just kept on thinking, I'm having so many lectures in buildings named after people that
Wouldn't have
a
wanted you.
real distaste for me and wrote about their distaste for me and got published.
Yeah.
Um, this doesn't sit right. I'm tired of going to lectures where people are talking about ski holidays because I can't relate.
Mhm.
Like I'm tired of trying to find community based on one aspect and it not quite landing. So, it was
Mhm.
just in terms of belonging, it was not quite a straightforward route for me, but I eventually got there. But yeah, for many reasons, I feel a lot of like gratitude to UCL for initially giving me the resource that meant that I got that spark and I got that encouragement and I got those material things that inspired me to go on. But, you bring people in and is the environment there ready for them, you know?
Yeah,
Is it really going to be a false promise? Honestly, I don't want to put UCL on blast in particular. It might not be a UCL specific thing. Let me put my hands up and say that.
yeah.
But that's, yeah, that's my opinion.
No, it's a brilliant opinion, right? It's because what you've kind of like highlighted there is that, was it false selling?
Mm,
Was it we'll provide you and say this is what it's going to be like in the Saturday school experience, but the real experience when you get there was something totally different.
mm,
Yeah. um and how do you gain that sense of belonging and that support? So you mentioned about the fact that you set up the hip hop society, and as a result of that, that's where you found your sense of identity or your sense of belonging.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So academically then,
Yeah.
whilst you were at UCL,
Mhm.
um, were you feeling that you were being able to um, connect? Were you being able to now show the true Simone, as it were, in terms
I
of,
basically, no, I just walked around there masking like the whole time
wow, in
because
what sense?
it was just quite uncomfortable, and I don't feel like I really relaxed unless I was around like my group of people.
Hmm.
Um, because there were like 60 people that were doing the biology undergrad. Two of us were black or mixed heritage
Hmm.
women. There were no black men, which is a whole other story.
Hmm.
Mm. And how I just found it difficult to connect. So, for example, I did a year abroad,
Hmm.
third year, and I went to the University of Queensland. And in deciding so that's in Australia, and
Hmm.
in deciding which university to go to, I was speaking with the person that was guiding it at the time, the academic, and asking, oh, have any BME people gone on these exchanges before? Like, are there places like genuinely that I should maybe avoid or anyone had bad experiences in? And he just turned around and said, what's BME? I just thought, like,
Oh my goodness.
how am I supposed to do this in a like conscious and safe way and like grab this opportunity for what it
Hmm.
is when you can't even give me this basic information about safety?
Hmm.
So, and there were loads of safety issues, which I won't go into. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I can. So I'm still, I'm really now very, very curious about, with facing all of these challenges that you faced.
Mm.
How was it that what was it that kept you going, your drive? Where, how did you manage to kind of like get to where you are now? Why did you kind of like go on to pursue a PhD? How did that come about?
The PhD came about. So that's one thing about role models and mentors. The PhD came about because Christoph Decimos, who supervised my master's project, was batting for me. So at the end of my master's project, it was my first project where I'd coded before. So I'm a computational biologist. I analyze data, I don't make it. So I analyze data currently to understand how we make our immune systems. But previously, I was looking at coding to understand what plant genes are doing, what function plant genes have, because essentially genes are conserved and genes have genes have like families, and across the different species, like a gene that's important for our seeing might be the same gene that's important for a bat seeing or something. So there's conservation. So I was in Christoph Decimos's group looking at how we can infer the function of plant genes based on their function in other species. And he was a great supervisor, and I was also supervised by a postdoc in his group, Natasha Glover. And at the end of the masters, I was unsure about my coding capability, didn't know what to do next. I'd just been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis,
Mhm.
and I was like, "What's next?" And so, amidst all of that, which was a big year,
Mhm.
um, the the PhD cycle had already begun because really when you start your masters in a September, early the next year, just some months later, you're going to want to be starting to apply for PhDs in the formal processes with
Yeah.
UKRI and things. And those formal processes came round and I was like, I'm in bed. I can't do this.
Yeah.
Like I can't do this. So I didn't. And at the end, Christoph turned around to me and said, what are you doing next? And I said, I'm not sure. So you can do a PhD. I said, I don't know if I can. I don't know, really, I didn't know if I was made of it. It just seemed really scary, intimidating, long. All the PhD students I saw were at UCL were tired. I was like, I don't know about this. And he turned around and he was like, so why wouldn't you apply? And I was like, I don't meet the criteria. So I'd looked at the criteria, I'd looked at a few, and I saw where it phrased things like you must have excellent coding skills and proficiency in this field and in that field and in this field. And I was like, I don't have all of that. I don't meet the criteria. Fine, cool. Maybe I have to go off and work in a wet lab for a year and get more well-rounded experience and come back. I don't quite tick it all. And he turned around to me, and this was a white man, and he said, why is it that all the women that I supervise at the end of their projects turn to me and say they're not going to apply for things because they don't meet all the criteria? You don't have to meet all the criteria. It might look like you have to, but you don't. And if you're the right one for the role and you do not meet criteria 9 and 10, trust me, 9 and 10 won't matter. So just go for it. Apply for a lot and you'll see. And I applied for jobs doing wet labs and got rejected, 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 rejected. And I was like, geez, I guess I can't do wet lab stuff. And I applied for loads of computational PhDs in Newcastle, when my husband was at the time.
Mhm.
And then two of them replied to me and said, we'll do an interview. And one was looking at, it was with like a toothpaste company. It was like with it was a collaboration with industry kind of thing, and they were looking at microbiome stuff, but computational. And one was looking at how you make the immune system computational. And so I interviewed, and then I ended up going with the immune system one. Um, but yeah,
Did you get both?
I got an interview for both, and then I went with the one I've got.
Okay, okay. Because I'm just thinking about what Christoph had said to you, saying you don't have to meet all the criteria, but you have to be in the. You have to have put yourself forward in order
Yeah,
for people to make that assessment of you. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah. You can't what's
You
the word?
can't self. If you select yourself out, then you're yeah.
That's
If
it.
there's one guarantee, if you're not in there, you're not going to get it. Yeah,
Yeah. So I was
yeah,
pretty sure I don't meet these things. I see these rejections. They mean something. But then it came out and I was like, do you know what? Maybe I don't make that decision for people anymore.
Mhm,
Maybe from
mhm,
now on, I'll always just do the application and forget the application and see what
yeah,
happens. And if it's good news, it's good news. And so that's kind of what I've done. And
yeah,
every time there's been a decision point since then, I have felt the same thing. So after my PhD, when I was like, oh, but can I do this? I was like, you know what? Let them decide. When
yeah.
I was for the Royal Society CDF, I was like, do you know what?
Let them decide.
Decide. Because every single time when I've got it in the back of my head of, oh, but you don't quite meet X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. So that bit of advice from Christoph really made a big impact. So that really stood out to me.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
that's.
it's because he didn't make it personal. He made it a bigger, wider issue. And he said, look,
Mhm,
is what you're going through part of a wider issue? And it got
mhm,
me really thinking. And that's why it landed with me.
mhm. So it's really. Can you give us a? I like to, because I know I've got an immunologist on the panel with us today, right? Um, can you just give a little bit of a flavor
Mm.
of what your PhD was and some of the outputs from your PhD?
Yeah, so I was looking at how we make our immune systems. So specifically, I was analyzing data from first and second trimester fetal samples, so human fetal samples that have been donated for research. And the ethics have all been sort of organized and coordinated by the HDBR, the Human Developmental Biology Resource. It's a really unique resource for the UK. It's really important. It's based in Newcastle and London, and they actually share materials, and coordinate materials internationally. And so that's a big research strength for London and Newcastle, the fact that we can access these tissues. And for example, when I speak to colleagues in the US, they're always so shocked that we can do the research that we do. We don't need to use mouse models, etc.
Mhm,
I've been specifically looking at these samples, and I've been looking at how do we look at the immune cells that are present in the first and second trimester, and how do we make a sort of map of all the cells that are present and what they're doing.
Hmm.
So I took a sort of tissue-wise approach, and I first looked at how that happens in the liver. So the liver is a really important site for making your blood and immune cells in the first trimester. And then it hands over to the bone in the second trimester.
Mm.
And so I worked on the bone marrow for my PhD mainly. So that was my sort of co-first author paper, the major thing. So I
Hmm.
looked at how we set up our immune system in our bones in the second trimester, and that lays the foundation for lifelong blood formation. So from second trimester onwards into adulthood, like you or me on the call, everyone else on the call, unless you have an immune disorder, you're likely producing all of your blood and immune cells in your bone marrow consistently for hemostasis, but also in response to injury. You lose a lot of blood, your bones will kick in. So my PhD was really looking at, okay, we know the bone is important. There's an amazing work based on mouse that's already happened. Can we, for the first time, look at how it's laid down in human? And so I looked at these samples, I analyzed this data, and what we found was that the white blood cell repertoire was so much more diverse than we thought. We were seeing immune cells that are normally have roles in allergy, for example, and response to sort of generic infection, but they're already there so early in the second trimester, and they're already doing some things, and maybe some non-canonical roles as well.
Hmm.
So that was what my PhD was, you know, what are they doing there, and how do we establish that? And then my current postdoc has taken a step back from just looking at immunology. And it's looking at immunology, but in concert with all of these other systems that are happening. So not just the immune system, but your musculoskeletal system, your nervous system. I'm now making a sort of map, the same kind of map, a single cell atlas of all of the cells in a human embryo. So I'm not looking at first and second trimester, I'm looking at first trimester embryo when you're like a centimeter by a centimeter. And I'm looking at that stage and all the cells that are in the embryo, all
Hmm.
of the cells, not just the immune cells, but the nervous system cells, the musculoskeletal system cells. So that's my current postdoc. And that really made me lean back and appreciate, you know, the work I was doing in these specific tissues was in a silo. I was looking at the liver,
Hmm.
saying, okay, blood and immune cells in the liver. And isn't it interesting that these vessels are telling the blood to do this? Then in the
Hmm.
bone, I was doing the same. I was like, isn't it interesting that these bony cells are telling the blood to do this? And now I've got this data in embryo and I can see everything. And it was really illuminating to realize, you know, the previous work in a silo was great and it laid the foundations, but everything is happening in parallel. You're forming your blood and immune system, but your nerves are forming. They're even innovating into your skin by 4 week
Yeah.
post-conception. There's a lot happening in the same time. So that's kind of what I based my fellowship application on. So I started thinking, you know, I've got this background in immunology. I can see how all of these systems are forming at 6 weeks. So I've got this basis in what development looks like at the 6 week stage. Can I now better understand comprehensively using computational approaches what some of these systems are doing to talk to each other?
Yeah.
So, firstly, using the hematopoietic system, the blood system, because that's my background, but increasingly using the nervous system because it's my second thing I'm leaning into now. So my fellowship is looking at how the neurons and glia interact with blood. So how your nervous system regulates blood formation. So I've looked at blood formation in these different tissues. I've looked at all of these systems at 6 week deep profiling, and now I'm looking at how they talk to each other.
All I'm going to do is just clap, right? Because that sounds, I love the way that you moved it from a single cell, that single cell narrative,
Mm,
to look at that holistic viewpoint,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and to show that we're all in, it's all interconnected. You're not acting in silos.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And all right, so there was something else that there's a couple of things that you alluded to, right? In terms of challenges. One was about finding out about you developing rheumatoid arthritis, yeah, and then the other one was about that mindset that you had when applying for
Yeah,
different things.
yeah,
Whereas before it was kind of like, I don't meet it
yeah,
and I'm going to self-select out,
yeah,
compared to actually let them decide whether I meet it or not,
yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
I'm going to tackle the second one first, and then we'll go back to the arthritis and see how that challenged you in that sense. when you were going for your application for the Royal Society, now can you just illuminate the audience what the Royal Society is and what this application that you went for was?
So the Royal Society is one of the world's oldest scientific institutions, and they've had fellows for hundreds of years now. But what they also do is they have research fellows. And so they fund independent level research fellows, for example, with a university research fellowship that, for example, Brian Cox got to do his research. And also for similar level fellowships that are actually specifically for people that need more flexible working patterns, like have caring responsibilities or long-term conditions. So that's their Dorothy Hodgkins Fellowship. So around 2 years ago now, they launched their career development fellowship. And this is not that independent level fellowship, it's a postdoc level fellowship where you're on the step to independence. And they specifically launched it as a pilot for Black heritage researchers. And so they were going about awarding 5 career development fellows in their sort of first formal postdoc fellowship as a pilot. Um, and so that is what when I saw that, it was, I guess, it called to me to say, they have a eligibility criteria of 2 years post PhD. You get into the 2 years post PhD stage because I think the date of the deadline, you can't be more than 2 years post PhD. So I saw that and I thought, okay, eligibility doesn't feel too weird here because if anything, I'm almost
Yeah.
I'm like a week. I had to email them and say, I'm like a week over. Is that okay? And they were like, yeah, it's a week. Relax. Um, Also, it was over COVID. So I was like, I know I'm a week over, but also a COVID PhD. Is that okay? And they're like, yeah, stop emailing us. Like, so yeah, so that's what they launched. And yeah, when it came out, I had that same sort of mindset of don't self-select. And it kind of, for me, signaled the transition of like this is the time to start looking at independent level fellowship, well, step to independent fellowships, so postdoc fellowships. Because I was 2 years into my 3-year term postdoc, and I was thinking, okay, what is the exit plan? But I was kind of delaying it, just getting busy with the research, just getting busy with the research, various other things. And when I saw this call, it kind of signaled to me like now's the time to start working stuff out.
Mhm,
There are other postdoc level fellowships to apply for. Have a look at them as well. See if you can apply for multiple across different organizations. But I think it was seeing that the criteria was 2 years post PhD for the Royal Society made me better look at that landscape, better see what else was out there for me. And because it was targeted at Black researchers, it made me feel like, yeah, this is for me. So
mhm,
I'm to apply for it and make them decide.
mhm.
And if there's any wider calls, then I will oh, thanks, Tom. Yeah, and if there's any wider calls that I've kind of like neglected to look at up until this day, now's the time to start applying for them. So it's kind of the signal for me to say, you are totally eligible, you are totally eligible. We want to hear from you, apply. And then that kicked off, um, yeah, toward the beginning of this year, getting all those applications in.
And as you were going through that process, because again, you're going into the unknown, something which is a highly prestigious kind of highly prestigious society, something which has been. Did you feel? Did you feel kind of like I don't want to say scared, but would I match up? Would I live up to their expectations? What was your mindset now going into that kind of organization?
Do you know, I felt that before the call. So before the call, when I had my Excel list with all the postdoc fellowships and their criteria and when their deadlines were, I felt that I don't quite match up to this. Like you need to have all of these outputs. I don't know if I can, like, do I have the scientific idea yet?
Mhm,
Like I was just deep in looking at my embryo work. I wasn't really leaning back and giving myself the time to think what would be interesting to do next.
mhm,
It was only when it was like deadline now, I leant back and I thought, I do like looking at these systems. Like I do like this way. I do want to go more into the systems biology thing, like, and computational research has a really good fit in there. Maybe I can do that. So it was only when I saw the call and it really felt like it was for me and it was pointed, I felt I felt like it was allowed, do you know what I mean? It made it more allowed. So I was like, yeah, maybe I can do this. Whereas when I looked at the wider calls that I actually was eligible for, and I was equally eligible for, and they offer the same package as the Royal Society, I was reading those and feeling completely under-equipped. I
Mhm.
don't know why, but I just was. So it's when I saw the Royal Society, it made me look at these with fresh eyes and say, well, if you're going to go for that, and that's equivalent, go for that too.
Yeah.
And then I start putting it in context, and I'm like, right, so if I feel okay to apply for that because they've called out my name basically,
Yeah.
then that equivalent one wasn't as scary as you thought, you know? So
So
kind of rejigged my brain a little bit because it was so focused. Yeah.
there's you keep triggering me every time you say not in a bad way, not in a bad way, because you're triggering me to think of slightly different things, just in the sense that in that self-selection process, it wasn't until the society, in the language that they use,
Yeah, it was the language.
drew drew
Yeah.
your attention to the fact that actually we want you.
Yeah, it felt like they were really like calling out my name. They were like, hello, hello, 2 years, your 2 years, come on, do this. And then that's when I looked at all of the other calls with fresh eyes and said, well, if I feel like I can fill out this application form, theirs is exactly the same. And it just never felt the same because it wasn't signaled in the same way.
Mhm. So once you started going through that process,
Mm.
right? Because I'm sure there was rounds of interviews and things that you had to go through. Did at any point did you feel, now I can't do this, or was your mind now set to say, I'm on this, and they are looking at me in a way to say, we want you?
Mm. I think as soon as I started to apply for to sort of let my like local research group know or my mentors know that I'm going to start applying for these things, I think everybody did get into action and did really support me.
So,
So
so can you just elaborate on what your research group did to help you?
yeah, so specifically, for example, like with my PI, when I was drafting and writing, she really encouraged me to come to her early with ideas. And even if it was, to just start with a half-page bullet point of what do you want to research and why. And I did that. And the first time I did that, she said, Simone, that's like a program grant. That's what I would apply for. Like, like the aim one, the first bullet point, do that. If you just do that and give clear aims for how you're going to do that, that's going to be more than enough for a postdoc fellowship. So, for example, I mentioned to you that like looking across all of these different systems was really interesting to me. And that's kind of how I've written my current postdoc paper that I'm drafting. I've kind of gone, okay, we've got this embryo. Here's how the musculoskeletal system looks, the nervous system, this and that and this. And I think the way to build on it is to look at how they interact. And so that's why I proposed that fellowship. But what I was giving a bullet point to my supervisor for was essentially to do all of that.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to statistically know what systems are interacting the most. I want to know what's the most important for blood. Like, does your blood system really care most about the musculoskeletal system and the vessels around it? Is that what's important for maintaining it? Or do the nerves play a bigger role? Like, I was really trying to like prioritize things and do a big thing. And she was like, no, 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 no. You get excited, aren't you? She was just like, look, what are the systems that you have credibility in and that you have current real strong interest in, right? And what is your history going to be able to help you build on? And I was like, well, I've got the blood thing,
Mhm.
and the nervous system is where my collaborators are now, my strongest collaborators that I speak to regularly. So if I work with them and I propose them on my project, and I lean back on my history and I use that as my credit, then maybe I'll come across okay enough to get this fellowship. But so she helped me basically really early to pull back the ideas and refine them because obviously looking at this funding landscape, I had no idea of the scope of these things. I didn't know what kind of scope a postdoc fellowship should have versus an independent fellowship.
Mhm.
So the postdoc one's like 700K over 4 years. Maybe the university research fellowship for the Royal Society is like 2 million over 8 years. And, onto all these different grants and things people might get. And because my supervisor has been really fingers in all pies and applying for stuff for years and years now, she was able to pass that information on to me and prompt me to bring that to her early. So she was saying, come talk to me for 10 minutes. I got 10 minutes. What are your ideas? And giving me the guidance early meant that I wasn't drafting 3 pages of something that just wasn't appropriate.
So those are some valuable lessons
So that
for.
was really helpful, like from day one to say, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
elaborate on that, build on that. And then I brought other stuff back, and she was like, the second one seems like a lot of risk. Here's how you deal with risk. Here's how you mitigate risk. This one doesn't have a lot of background data. How are you going to talk about that? Like, so she was highlighting these things along the way. And then because other people in my research group have recently applied for things, but they were clinical. They knew of people that might help in the institute. So they pointed out to me people in the research funding office and said, they helped me with my clinical lectureship thing, or my grant here, my grant there. They might help research academics as well. And so I started to know who in the research development team would be the people to read through my application and literally line for line tell me what is working, what isn't working. So I was able to get the more science feedback from my group and then get pointed to the right places to get the proper, here's how you pitch feedback. And then when I was, so that helped me to really refine it and submit it. And then when I got the interview call back, so I submitted it in January, and I think they maybe mentioned it in May or April, March or April for a May interview. In that time when I was preparing, again, the research office were really proactive and said, are you going to do mock interviews? We can organize them for you, you know? And I was like, do you know what? I've got loads of random other people outside the institute that I want to come, like my collaborators. So I'll organize it. But thank you for the prompt. Like,
Hmm.
do you have guidance or feedback? And they shared loads of stuff with me about how the slides should be, because it was a slide talk that I had to give at
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
minute talk, 10-minute Q&A.
Hmm.
But at the interview stage, again, like the research funding office came through, really helped me figure out the slides for the interview. The Royal Society, to their credit, did host a really informative webinar where they explained exactly what the interview would be like, down to how the room would look. So that would be really massively helpful for anybody that had like anxiety or anything, just to like, they literally showed pictures with
Hmm.
circles over faces of where people would be sitting on the
Yeah.
table.
Hmm.
And so they also prepared us and said, you know, this is how it's going to be. Here are the likely questions. Um, specifically think about these questions. And then I did the mock interviews within my department with the wider collaborators, and they were really harsh and really
Hmm.
hard. And I just don't want to ever do them again. It was like I did too many. I did like there was one week where I did like one or two a day. And
Oof.
it was just treading water, because as soon as I got massive feedback, that completely changed all of the slides.
Hmm.
3 hours to prepare for the next one. So I was
Yeah.
just things were changing so quickly. But by the end of that week, I then came to my PI and I said, I think I've got it. Can I show you? And then I went to my mentor and I did the same. And between them, they basically there were so many changes still. Between them, my mentor was like, right, start with why. Come on. Like this
Hmm.
is a pitch.
Hmm.
Got the
Hmm.
science down, fine, you know, your medical school have figured you out. That's great. But this is a pitch. And you guys have all maybe noticed we've only got 2 minutes left. I can
Yeah.
chat. So at the interview, the biggest feedback was stop, stop. But anyway, I won't do that right now. But when I got to the later stages of the interview prep, and I was making my slides, both my PI and my external mentor, Jason Gill, based at Glasgow Uni, he's actually my mentor through the Black British and STEM community from my PhD, and he's actually stuck around for a really long time and supported me through all of these different pivotal steps. But he was giving me point on point feedback alongside my PI in the final days before the interview to essentially make it more start with why this is a pitch. There's not really the science. Forget the science. You're selling the science. And so
Yeah.
they kind of passed that on to me, and that helped a lot. And it changed it completely again. And then the interview was then at that point, I was just like, right, I'm doing this the 10th time. Like I'm tired, but I've done it before. So it wasn't a horrible process. The Ross Society people were very um welcoming. And because I had prepared and I had all of that support from my network, I felt ready. So I went in and I left and I was like, you know what, I did what I could do. If I didn't get it, it wasn't my time, but I'm happy with how I put myself across. Like I didn't do a disservice to myself, so I'm good. That's kind of where I left it.
This has just been brilliant. You're right. We only have a few minutes left,
Yeah.
but there are so many questions I still have to ask, which I want to ask, but
Only the one thing I would end on is seeing that the process was like that for me, and knowing that very many other people will have applied for the CDF. It sort of I can see it as a sort of selection process for people that have that network and have that support to do this process,
Mm,
right? And if the reason that this retention and progression in academia for Black researchers is because maybe we don't have that network or that support, or are more likely to be going through some, I don't know, bullying issues or dealing with racism or whatever, then it kind of does feel like a bit of a sifting.
Hmm.
So I'm really happy that the Royal Society did do that webinar
Hmm.
prepare us. But I think maybe my situation was atypical for many Black researchers in the UK. And I know that other Black researchers will not have had that support. And that kind of selects you out when you don't know to speak to your funding office or have a mentor or have a PI that's supportive. So, it's like your network can be everything at times, and it really helped me.
You know what? One of the things which I appreciate as you were describing that process was the way in which your supervisors and your mentors helped to demystify the process for you.
100%. That was it. It was a constant circle of, but they said that on the application form, and they go, no, no,
Yeah,
let me tell you, it's a pitch.
yeah,
And I'm like, right, okay.
yeah. And that's what I think many people don't recognize.
Mm,
And so they fall at every single hurdle
yeah,
because they haven't been able to interpret or to understand the process which they're going through.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Um, I, I want to ask you, I know that you alluded to the fact that you had, well, you have arthritis.
Yeah.
Has that challenged you in any ways in the way that you can work, and how have there been adjustments which you've had to make to ensure that you can be at peak performance
Yeah.
and maintain your health and well-being?
So I've got my adjustable table. But aside from that, yeah, a lot of adjustments. And
Mhm.
I think you need a research team that's going to support you to make sure that you're not going to, if you've got any long-term conditions, that you're not going to flare, and that you're going to be able to respond in an agile way if things need to happen, if you need to go to appointments. So being open and disclosing it to my PI was key. That happened during my PhD. And as soon as we came to a proper understanding with each other about what I needed, things were very smooth. When I wasn't disclosing and the relationship wasn't quite there, it was very difficult. But as soon as she knew what I needed, and she knew, okay, Simone needs rest for this period, or Simone needs to go for this doctor's appointment, I'm not going to question it. Simple, easy. I had what I needed. When she was happy to sign the forms for occupational health, all of this, simple, easy. I had what I needed. But as soon as I thought maybe that I was going to be questioned for taking time off to do things for my health, that would have been the issue. So I've definitely had to adjust things. I've put flexible work in,
Mhm.
like it was my contract now as a postdoc, which is really important. And as a computational person, actually, it's a really accessible field. So
Mhm.
I'm lucky that I fell into the coding stuff during my master's, because for me being in a wet lab probably wouldn't have worked out, all of that pipetting. So genuinely, computational work is really accessible, and I was able to do that throughout some of my worst flares, um, even when you do voice to text and things like that. So yeah, I think being able to be frank and open and honest with your needs, and having people that actually listen to them and don't fob you off as being a problem, is really important to be able to retain yourself in this space without being kicked out. Because I feel like if the reception that I got was different, it would have been a push
Yeah.
situation.
You know what, Simon? I say this to a lot of my guests, right? That I want to follow up on this, but if I don't know how long belonging is going to be going, but I am definitely going to, um, in a couple years' time, if we're still on course, I want to hear how your progress is getting on, right? Because you've just in what you've said, I believe that anybody who is thinking about applying for one of those Royal Society fellowships as such, you have already set down there a blueprint of the
Mm.
kind of support mechanisms which need to be in place so that we can thrive and demystify the process. But also, in when you were just speaking, the final thing which you were talking about, the disclosure of your what
Yeah.
you need as an individual to thrive. I
Yeah.
think sometimes people are afraid to say, in order for you to see the best of me, can
Yeah.
you accommodate this?
Yeah.
You know?
Reception is not great. That could,
Huh?
it feel like it, if the reception is not good for when you say that, it can
Yeah,
feel like horrendous, very nerve-wracking to have
yeah,
to, yeah, but it's
yeah.
needed. And I think for me, I didn't say it at first because it wasn't needed, but then
Mm-hmm,
COVID happened and it was needed. I had to
mm-hmm,
say something.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I had to say what I needed.
mm,
Shielding was involved, all of this, like I couldn't do this
yeah,
British going around the problem anymore. I had to just be frank. And she's a very straightforward person, so it worked. And
Yeah.
she could finally see where I was coming from
Yeah.
because I actually said what I needed.
That's amazing. I'm just I want to just say a big thank you. I normally open it up for questions for everybody else, right? I'm not sure if we'll have to leave that to the after party, right? So I'm gonna just ask two final questions, right? The first of those questions is, what advice would you have given to your younger self? Considering where you are now, what advice would you have given to your younger self? And the second question is, what do you think your younger self would look at you now and say, wow?
Mm. I think so. The advice to my younger self would probably be science is just people, like choose them wisely. It's really just
Mm.
people. Whoever you surround yourself with, that's it. Your network, your support, that's it. So just choose them wisely. Um, and yeah, the most fun science can be miserable if you're not around that. And then what would younger me say to me now? I would probably see myself as like that unicorn that was helping out at the Saturday school. I'd probably have a lot of questions and not leave myself alone. I'd probably just be like, how, why, what? And then emails, really? Like but it would be exactly the same rerun of the Saturday school thing. I think I would be shocked.
I can see you. I can see your younger self with that inquisition, that curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of my guests a few weeks ago had given me the five P's, right? And they were poor preparation,
Mm,
no, proper preparation prevents poor performance.
okay.
And when I listened to the process which you went through in
Mm,
getting your fellowship, that
yeah,
was definitely proper preparation,
yeah,
right? And it definitely prevented poor performance. Why? Because you are now going to be one of the inaugural Royal Society Career Development Fellows. And you know what? We're all here to support you, right? Myself, Donald, Deshane, everybody on the call, we're here to support you, you know. So it's really amazing. Okay. So all good things must come to an end. I just want to say another big thank you, and then I'm going to just share with our guests who we're going to have on next week. So thank you. So next week we're going to have a relationship couple, Andrea and Jonathan Taylor Cummings, and they are the co-founder of the Four Habits, and they specialize in equipping people to do relationships well, so that they turn up better at home, at work, and in life. So that's going to be next Friday on the 29th of November between 12:30 and 1:30. So please join us then if you can. Um, and in addition, if you have missed any of the other um, belonging interviews that we've had, then please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging IAO. And you can see many other brilliant conversations that we've been able to have. I'm going to plug my book, the book again. And I'm also going to say, if you want to hear a little or read a little bit more about Simone's experience, then please go and read the Black PhD Experience, because she was one of the contributors to the narrative. So please, please, and if you order before the end of the month, you'll get a 50% discount. That's the shameless plug, but it's an excellent book, even if I say so myself, right? And for all of the many brilliant, and that's all I'm going to say, many brilliant people who have come and shared their stories, what I want to say is they have found, and they're still on their way to finding their sense of identity and sense of belonging. And so can you be. So until next week, please continue what you're doing and continue doing it well. Thank you very much. Bye bye.